Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. In the last video, I began to work through a list of disturbing manga suggestions that you guys felt were missing from the Disturbing Manga Iceberg, and this week I'm going through the rest of the list. It's been great getting back into this world. I've already found some comics that I'm really enjoying, so thanks everyone for the suggestions. And of course, there's always room for more, so let me know if you have anything else to add, and maybe I'll do some more videos in the future. If you want to help support my channel, consider becoming a patron where you'll get bonus content, a shout out at the end of every video, and I'll send you a Grief sticker. But I know what you're really here for, some really messed up manga. So let's just get into it.
Hava. Let's start off with an oddball. Hava is a one-shot by renowned manga artist Q Hayashida. This one is hard to explain as the text is literally gibberish, but the insane and disturbing art is pretty awesome. Apparently this one-shot was also used as concept art for the video game Shadows of the Damned, which is a pretty wild connection. Die Dark. Speaking of Hayashida, let's talk about Die Dark. This one stood out to me for just being so different in terms of world building. It takes place in a dark and dystopian space setting with aliens and space pirates and death. Lots of death. It kind of reminds me of Warhammer 40k, but with more fantasy elements thrown in. It follows Senko, a young man who's cursed. He wears a strange cloak and cowl called the Skin of Darkness, which makes him basically invulnerable, and travels with Avakian, a skeleton humanoid also known as the Package of Darkness. Avakian can transform into a small backpack that Santo can wear. He also carries a weapon known as the Axe of Darkness. When someone is killed with this axe, they instantly turn into bones. Now, I mentioned that Santo is cursed. Well, almost everyone in the galaxy who encounters Santo wants to kill him, and that's because his bones can be traded to an unknown entity that will grant any wish in return. It's unclear who this entity is or why Santo's bones are of value to him, but the legend has spread far and wide, causing Santo to constantly be evading death. Santo collects the bones of those who he kills and sells them to a dark merchant in a strange place known only as the Dark, which can only be accessed by entering a black hole. While this all seems doom and gloom, I should mention that the series is actually weirdly lighthearted with a lot of comedy moments. Like for instance, when Santo trades his bones to the merchant and she reveals what he can buy with them, and it just sounds like something out of a video game. He can increase the Skin of Darkness's defense, buy Flesh of Darkness to increase his health, or even buy a Dark Core to upgrade his ship. He goes for the Dark Core, which allows his ship to travel much faster and can even access the dark. With the new ship, he can now start his journey of hunting down the entity that wants his bones, hoping to kill it and put an end to this curse. Oh, I should also mention that Santo befriends Death at 8 years old, and she shows up often because Santo leaves a steady supply of souls for her to eat. Like I said, it's really out there, but in the best way. Dorohedoro. Another weird Hayashida comic, Dorohedoro also has a pretty unique setting. The story takes place within several different worlds. The whole is a heavily populated city in the human world. It's essentially a slum with no real government and is heavily polluted by magic, which leads us to the sorcerer's world. This world is run by a sorcerer named N, and the sorcerers here can create magical doorways to easily travel between worlds. The sorcerers often travel to the whole in order to test out their magic on humans, usually leaving them deformed. Kaiman, our protagonist, is a human who has been transformed into a reptile-like creature by a sorcerer. Unfortunately, he has amnesia and can't remember anything before he was cursed. The only thing he has to go off of is a full-sized man who lives in his body. So he shoves sorcerers' heads down his throat, and a man is in there who identifies whether it's the one they're looking for. I know, it's so weird. As he continues on this journey, he's accompanied by his friend Nikaido, a chef who owns a restaurant in the hole. Like Die Dark, it's got a humorous tone to it and a very unique story worth checking out. Happiness. Happiness is a vampire story following a teen boy, Okazaki. One night he's attacked by a woman who then sucks his blood. She asks, "Do you want to die or be like me?" He wakes up in the hospital, but continues to feel thirsty even after drinking water. Well, you know where this is going. Okazaki is now a vampire and becomes intertwined into this new world while also managing a social life. While this one isn't initially super graphic or violent, it does have its fair share of gore. There's also a few strange and disturbing aspects, like the fact that when Okazaki initially turns, he starts smelling blood, and well, this escalates in school when he begins smelling the menstrual blood of the girls in his class. It's a really weird scene, but it also makes sense, and you don't really see that angle in vampire stories very often, probably because it's really weird. The vampires here also share blood with each other by puking into each other's mouths, which is pretty gnarly. And when Okazaki utilizes his full vampire powers, there's some really cool and disturbing art. Octopus Girl. The story follows a girl who's bullied by her classmates in violent and horrible ways that would probably kill her in real life. She wishes for revenge and her head spontaneously detaches from her body and transforms into an octopus, which she uses to kill her bullies. The story then follows her adventures as a disembodied head with octopus tentacles, which is filled with gore, scat, and insane situations. The series has a cult following in Japan, and Dark Horse published the first 3 volumes in English, although the volumes are really hard to find and really expensive. My Dearest Self with Malice Aforethought. This is a psychological thriller manga with plenty of twists and turns. It follows Eiji, a college student who goes out drinking with his friends, and when he wakes up in the morning, he finds that 3 days have passed, of which he has no recollection. At the same time, strange murders of young women begin cropping up, and they seem to be emulating a similar string of murders from 15 years earlier. And these murders were done by Eiji's father, who seemed to have had a dark split personality. Like I said, this one is more of a thriller overall, but my god, the victims are shown in gruesome detail and are particularly brutal as the killer mutilates their bodies in various ways, like cutting off their hands and shoving them in their mouths. It really surprised me how disturbing these deaths were. So of course, Eiji starts being investigated as a suspect. Like I said, there are a ton of twists and turns along the way. Flowers of Evil. I originally left Flowers of Evil off the iceberg because at first glance it looked like a classic love triangle drama, but seeing it recommended several times in the comments, I gave it another look, and while yes, it is for the most part a straightforward drama, it does have its share of really dark moments, and the relationships themselves are very disturbed, so my bad for missing this one. It starts with a teenager, Kazuga, stealing his crush, Saki's, gym clothes out of some kind of pervy desperation. Well, another girl in his class, Nakamura, finds out what he did and begins to blackmail him into a strange relationship. At the same time, Kazuga manages to start dating Saki, causing a rift between him and Nakamura, who is a straight up psychopath. Eventually, he breaks up with Saki and decides he has stronger feelings for Nakamura. In order to impress her, he steals the panties from all the girls of his class. Together, they come up with some antisocial and rebellious plans to pin up the panties on a post at the town's upcoming summer festival. Saki, distraught over the breakup, attempts to seduce Kazuga, and when he rejects her, she straight up rapes him. Yeah, I didn't expect that. It gets darker from there, but unlike a lot of mangas like this, it does end on a good note. In the Room. In the Room is about a group of people who wake up in what appears to be an abandoned prison. This place is eerily similar to a popular online game called The Room. Besides the typical paranoia that the characters have of one another, there are giant deformed humanoid creatures that kind of remind me of Silent Hill. These creatures appear in a room kind of like a boss fight, further resembling a video game. This might be a bit of a spoiler, but it's in the first chapter and it's funny. In chapter 1, you're introduced to who you assume is the main character, a college kid who is the #1 room player in the world. He awakes along with everyone else and starts believing he truly is the protagonist who needs to defend the pretty girl and stand up against the creature. But in a hilarious twist, he finds that he's not the main character and screams in terror as he dies. I thought that this was just a great troll for the first chapter and just shows you that some of the typical tropes are dropped for this one. Nijigahara Holograph. Translating to Rainbow Field Holograph, this story is centered around a girl named Ari and the horrible events surrounding her. Ari is a 5th grade student who's obsessed with an old fairy tale which she tells to her classmates. The story is about a girl who's sent by God to warn a village of a monster who will consume them. 7 of the villagers decide to sacrifice the girl in order to appease the god. Well, this fairy tale is a not so subtle parallel of the events of the manga. Ari tells her classmates that the monster is real and lives in a drain tunnel, a story she's often bullied over. One day things go too far when 7 kids push Ari down a well, which leaves her in a coma for the majority of the manga. We then see the kids as adults and watch them deal with the guilt over the incident which has ruined their lives. There's a lot of tragedy here and pretty disturbing situations, like one of the bullies eventually becoming a mother who beats her children. This is all on top of the fact that Ari's father abuses her throughout her childhood, and he's not the only one either. Ari does not have it good at all, and that's the most disturbing part of the whole thing. No Longer Human. No Longer Human, sometimes translated as A Shameful Life, is actually a 1948 Japanese novel by Osamu Dazai, but was later adapted by horror legend Junji Ito into this manga. It follows Obayozo, a troubled boy that doesn't relate to other people and in fact finds humans disgusting. He's molested by both a male and female servant, something he tells no one as he assumes it won't matter. He develops a habit of telling jokes and putting on a facade as a class clown in order to get by socially, and this works pretty well until an unfortunate looking and slow classmate Takaichi sees through this facade. This terrifies Oba, and he decides to befriend Takaichi as a defense. He tells Takaichi that Setchan, who I think is Oba's cousin, has a crush on him. Takaichi develops strong feelings for her and confesses his love, only for Setchan to reject him and tell him she's disgusted by him. This leads to Takaichi killing himself. Oba, instead of feeling guilt or grief, instead feels relief as he doesn't have to deal with Takaichi anymore. Damn, that is one cold-hearted clown. Well, as Oba ages, he finds that he gets a lot of attention from women. So his two cousins, Setchan and Anissa, actually, I don't know for sure that they're his cousins, but as far as I can tell, I think they are. Anyway, they start fighting for his affection. First, he makes love to Setchan and then Anissa without the other knowing. That is until Setchan walks in on him banging Anissa. Shortly after this, Anissa announces that she's pregnant and Setchan freaks the hell out and stabs her to death. Then she announces that she's actually pregnant, and when she finally delivers the baby, it looks like Takaichi, who's been dead for a year. Yeah, what the hell is this? And this is just Oba's childhood. The series follows him into adulthood and things get even darker from there. It's a tragic story through and through, and the coming of age theme drenched in dread reminds me a lot of Goodnight Poon Poon. Signal 100. Signal 100 follows a high school class that is completely out of control. They ignore their teacher and actually make fun of and abuse him constantly. The teacher then has his job threatened if he can't get the class under control. Well, one day he says they're going to have their class in the AV lab, promising he'll pay every student 10,000 yen if they attend. When they get there, the teacher is nowhere to be found and the door is locked. A strange video begins playing from the projector full of horrific images. When the video finishes, the teacher appears and tells the class they have now been hypnotized. One of the students attempts to attack the teacher, and shortly after, he bashes his own head against the wall, dying instantly. The teacher then reveals that there are 100 post-hypnotic signals, one of them being physical violence, and if any are triggered, the student will commit suicide. The teacher goes on to explain that one of the triggers is telling anyone outside the class about the hypnosis, and that the only way to snap out of it is to watch all other classmates die and be the last one alive. He then jumps out of the school window, claiming he'll see them all in hell. Damn, that is one demented man. It's a pretty interesting premise, and it's actually been made into a live action film that came out in 2020. Shammo. Shammo follows the life of a teenage killer, Ryo Norishima. Ryo killed his parents at 16 years old, although he claims he doesn't remember doing it, and his life thereafter is full of pain and violence. The story is told in 4 parts, each with its own story arc. It starts with Ryo going to a reformatory, a sort of prison for underage criminals. The very first night he's there, he's thrown in a room with a group of other criminals who attack and forcibly violate him. The next night, the leader of the pack is expecting more of the same treatment, but Ryo bites off his dork. It's disgusting, it's vile, but man, it's great to see him fight back a little bit. Eventually, a criminal who assassinated the prime minister decades earlier is transferred to the reformatory to teach the boys karate. He sees some exceptional and natural ability in Ryo and helps him become even better than himself. Well, 2 years later, Ryo is released due to laws protecting minors from long-term imprisonment. From here, Ryo takes up martial arts and begins fighting professionally. Although he's definitely not on the up and up, as he's brutally violent against his opponents and he is forced to work as a male gigolo to make extra cash. This continues into a life of sex, drugs, and violence. I won't go over the whole thing, but you get the idea. It kind of reminds me of Ichi the Killer a little bit. Kami no Kodomo. This one immediately stood out to me for its unique art style. The title translates to God's child, and it starts with these chilling words. This is how I was born. I was born from my mother's asshole. You must allow me absolute freedom. Where will I go? Yeah, and that's over an image of a baby laying in a dirty toilet. We then watch as this child grows into a man and the horrible acts he commits along the way. He's a strange child who's fascinated with his own excrement. He's seriously just crapping on the floor, smearing it all over the walls, and on occasion, eating it. His first horrible act is the murder of his pet cat. From there, he eventually moves on to bigger prey, namely his fellow school children. The deaths look particularly disturbing because of the strange art style. The story is told from the perspective of the boy, and I think this adds to the unsettling quality of the terrible acts he commits. His psychopathy is clear as he talks about other humans as trash and shows no real emotions. In one particularly disturbing scene, he finds the naked corpse of a woman and pulls his pants off as he says, This was my first sexual experience. My God, the subtlety of the language is just so off-putting. Well, as he becomes a teen, he goes on to form a cult composed of elementary schoolboys who he teaches to murder homeless people, engage in cannibalism, and yes, like all cults, he has sex with them. I won't spoil the very ending, but this is a fairly short read if you want a unique and almost poetic story following a psychopath, so check it out. It's pretty messed up, but that's the point. Starving Anonymous. This is one of the most interesting finds to me because the story and setup is so insane and morbid, but I just couldn't stop reading. It starts with an interesting foreshadowing as EA, our protagonist, and his pal Kuzo are at McDonald's, and Kuzo explains to EA that the chicken nuggets he's eating are actually just waste meat ground up into pink slime. After this, they take a bus ride, and suddenly everyone on the bus passes out. Next thing EA knows, he awakens on a pile of human bodies on the back of a transport truck. He's immediately noticed and taken to a separate room. In this large room are dozens of naked and incredibly obese humans consuming a strange fatty liquid coming from hoses. EA notices that his friend Kazu is among them and that he's already rapidly gaining weight as well as becoming increasingly stupid. This is when EA meets Natsune and Yamabiki, who tell him not to drink the stuff, and they hatch a plan to escape. From here, things get more and more messed up. They find that the obese people are eaten by a giant caterpillar-like creature. They also find that there's an area of the facility where people are turned into breeders. This might be the darkest part of the manga, as we find that there are women who are pumped full of experimental drugs that make them want to be impregnated, and then it gets even stranger because they have multiple babies in groups of triplets and even quadruplets. Like, for example, one woman they show is only 20, but she has 18 babies. They also have males drugged up so that they'll attempt to impregnate the nearest living thing and will do just that until they die. It's insane, man. Well, it's kind of a spoiler, but it happens fairly early on. It turns out that the reason all these humans are being bred are as food for a group of alien insect creatures that are being appeased by the government. Also, Natsune turned out to have been the only successful patient in an experiment to create a human that can regenerate so that they can have an infinite supply of food for the alien overlords. So Natsune vows to destroy all the creatures and even manages to kill one of them. This, however, is recorded on a security camera, and a mad scientist within the facility who's been doing human experimentation in order to create superhumans sends his Frankenstein-like abominations after the survivors. It's absolutely bonkers, and like I said, it's actually one of the more interesting story concepts on here. Metamorphosis. All right, let's wrap this one up. This is one of the most messed up mangas I think I've ever covered. Metamorphosis almost feels like if you made a hentai into an anti-drug PSA. It follows a high school girl, Saki, who decides she wants to improve her social life by getting a makeover. Of course, she immediately begins getting attention from guys, and one of which takes her to a private booth in a karaoke bar where he gives her MDMA, aka ecstasy, and takes advantage of her. She starts to date the guy and gets addicted to having sex while on drugs. Pretty sad, right? Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Somehow or another, she begins sugar dating, basically being paid to date, and as you might expect, this goes from compensated dating to prostitution really quick, as an old man offers her money for sex. Well, apparently some of Saki's male classmates got photos of Saki with the old man and blackmail her for sexual favors. Horrible, right? Tragic, right? Well, we're just getting started. Saki's father gets laid off from his job, gets drunk, and proceeds to have his way with his own daughter. Of course, her mother doesn't believe Saki and beats her, so she runs away from home, drops out of high school, and moves in with the original boyfriend. Unfortunately, he's racked up some debt at a heroin bar, and Saki helps pay the debt off by selling herself to its patrons. At this point, her boyfriend also makes her get covered in tattoos and have a ton of piercings. She then gets pregnant and has an abortion. She meets back up with the old guy from the beginning and does increasingly degrading acts in order to get money from him. Then she's assaulted by the bar owner as well as all the patrons who inject her with heroin to make her more compliant, of which she develops an addiction. She finds that she's pregnant again and the boyfriend kicks her out, so now she's homeless and pregnant. She then vows to quit the drugs and raise the baby, so she raises money by being a prostitute. Well, she saves up quite a bit of money, but some of her classmates find her and then have their way with her before beating her and stealing the money. And in the end, Saki then stumbles into a public restroom where she ends her life. Why? Who would write this? Why did I read it?
Yeah, there were some really messed up ones this time. Well, you can blame yourselves for that, as these were all suggested in the comments by you guys. But I've enjoyed the journey, and feel free to leave any more suggestions down below. Shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Ali Morgan, Laz Wishgender, Malediction, Hunter Piva, Tora, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Hannah Broadstreet, K.A., Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, Koei, and Matt Rozak. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for helping the channel grow. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus videos and a Grief sticker, consider becoming a patron. But I think that's all I got for you today. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
If I feel like the moment's got a moment of its own, what if I'm alone again, left out like a little kid?